Dave Chappelle.
Dave Chappelle.
Dave Chappelle.
Dave Chappelle.
Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle.
A very large part of the reason that I got to be successful. Like literally, he changed my life just by saying, I fought Rick James many times. We were like, what?
At 52, Dave Chappelle stands on stages where laughter shakes the walls.
Fuck Rick James.
Fought Rick James. Charlemagne, Jesus Christ.
Didn't sound like he said.
That's what it sounded like. It didn't sound like that to me.
Yet the world has never truly understood the man who walks back into the silence afterward. People see the genius. They see the confidence. They see the sharp mind that cuts through the noise of society with a single sentence. But what they don't see is the weight he carries. For years, Dave became the voice millions leaned on, the comedian who spoke truths others were afraid to say. But behind that boldness lived a quieter story, one shaped by disappointment, betrayal, isolation, and a decision that once changed the course of his entire life. There was a moment, long before the standing ovations and the Netflix specials, when Dave realized the spotlight wasn't a place of safety, but a place where he could lose himself entirely. And what happened when he walked away from it all shocked the world. Yet the real reason he left, the human reason, remained hidden. Every joke had a wound behind it. Every pause had a memory. Every punchline carried the echo of something he survived. Tonight, we go beyond the fame, beyond the applause, beyond the legend. Because the truth is this: Dave Chappelle's life outside the spotlight is far more heartbreaking, far more complicated, and far more human than anyone ever imagined. And what he faced at the height of his success is the secret that shaped the man he is today. Now the question remains: what happened to Dave Chappelle when the cameras stopped rolling? And who did he become when laughter was no longer enough? To the world, Dave Chappelle has always been unmistakable. A silhouette with a mic in hand, a slow stride across the stage, a thoughtful stare just before he drops the kind of truth that makes an entire room shift. His public image became larger than life, almost mythic. People didn't just see him as a comedian, they saw him as a cultural interpreter, someone who could translate chaos into clarity with humor, sharp enough to carve through the hardest realities. Crowds believed he carried no fear. They believed he could say anything, attack any topic, expose any contradiction. He became the man who refused to be controlled, the artist who spoke with the freedom others only whispered about. His name was attached to boldness, intellect, rebellion, and honesty. In the eyes of millions, Dave Chappelle wasn't just performing comedy, he was performing truth. He seemed untouchable, the kind of person who walked through controversy with an unbreakable calm. Social media turned clips of him into symbols of courage. Talk show hosts described him as a philosopher hiding behind jokes. Fans claimed he was the last real voice in a world drowning in noise. The media portrayed him as the master of his craft, someone who walked his own path without apology, without hesitation, without fear. People saw the confidence, the swagger, the deep breaths before he delivered lines that made entire audiences roar. They saw a man who looked like he had everything under control. And because he made the world laugh, they assumed he lived in joy. Because he made hard truths look easy, they assumed he carried none of the burdens they felt. Because he walked off stage with a small smile, they believed he had mastered his life as effortlessly as he mastered the mic. They never questioned what his eyes looked like when the lights went dark. They never wondered what thoughts filled the quiet moments between shows. They never imagined how heavy it was to be the one everyone expected to speak for them. In interviews, Dave often appeared calm, grounded, even playful. He joked with hosts, shared stories, and charmed audiences with the same effortless rhythm that defined his stand-up. But even in those moments, there were glimpses, tiny ones, that hinted at something deeper. A pause, a thoughtful look, a sense that he carried more than he ever allowed the public to see. People labeled him a genius, but few thought about the cost of genius. They admired his courage, but rarely wondered where that courage was forged. They celebrated his success, but ignored the shadows that success cast behind him. To the world, he was a legend. To fans, he was a voice of reason. To the industry, He was unpredictable and uncontrollable, someone who couldn't be bought, pressured, or shaped. But all of these labels, all of these expectations, all of these assumptions built a version of Dave Chappelle that wasn't entirely real. A version that became harder to maintain as the years went on. The public image grew larger, louder, heavier, and the man behind it, quiet, reflective, deeply human, began to feel the weight pressing down on him. Because behind the stage lights, behind the applause, and behind the iconic reputation was someone who had learned to carry the world's assumptions without ever revealing how much they affected him. His public image was strength, but his private story was something else entirely. And that divide between who the world thought he was and who he really had to be would soon shape the choices that changed everything. Behind the sharp humor, behind the confident stride, behind the way Dave Chappelle stood on stage as if nothing in the world could shake him, lived a version of him almost no one ever saw. The hidden self. The quiet man who didn't speak in punchlines, who didn't try to make sense of the world for anyone else, who didn't owe anybody a joke or an explanation. This was the Dave who sat alone late at night, long after the audience had disappeared, long after the curtains had fallen, thinking not about fame, but about meaning, about purpose, about the cost of everything he had chosen and everything he had walked away from. Fame never came naturally to him. Even in his early years, attention felt like a strange kind of pressure, something that required him to constantly be on, even when he wanted nothing more than to retreat into silence. He learned early that people didn't love Dave, the person. They loved Dave, the idea, the symbol, the entertainer who could make the world feel lighter for an hour, even if his own heart felt heavy. There were moments when even laughter felt exhausting. Moments when being the one who spoke truth felt like carrying a burden too large, too complicated, too lonely. When he wasn't performing, Dave became introspective, often sinking into deep thought, replaying memories, questioning choices, trying to understand why the world felt easier on stage than it ever did in real life. He once admitted, in rare vulnerability, that sometimes the silence after a show was louder than the laughter had been, that it reminded him of the things he didn't joke about, the things he didn't want to say out loud, the things he wished he could make sense of, but couldn't. This hidden self was sensitive, more sensitive than people believed. He felt the weight of every headline, every criticism, every expectation. He felt the industry's eyes watching, waiting, judging. He felt the pressure of being a voice for so many people who saw their experiences reflected in his words. And sometimes he felt cornered by that responsibility, like he couldn't breathe without someone twisting his intentions or turning his truth into controversy. He carried memories he rarely spoke of, the confusion of his childhood, split between worlds that didn't always fit together, the moments of self-doubt when he questioned if he was enough, for his family, for his art, for himself. The heartbreak of realizing that people he trusted didn't always want what was best for him, and the lingering ache of moments he wished he could rewrite. Dave Chappelle laughed loudly on stage, but off stage his silence carried stories he never told. He worried deeply, thought deeply, felt deeply. He questioned the world more than he mocked it. His humor wasn't born from arrogance, it was born from survival, from pain, from the need to understand the chaos around him. There was another part of his hidden self too, the part that longed for escape, for normalcy, for peace. He dreamed of living a quiet life away from the noise, surrounded by people who didn't care about the fame, the shows, the debates, or the pressure. People who saw him not as a social commentator, but as a father, a husband, a friend, a man simply trying to live without the world interpreting every breath he took. In the privacy of his thoughts, Dave often wondered what his life would have been like if he never stepped on a stage, if he never grabbed a microphone, if he never carried the world's expectations on his shoulders. Would he have been happier? Or would the silence he dreamed of feel just as heavy as the fame he carried? This hidden self wrestled with contradictions. needing solitude yet loving the stage, craving peace yet drawn to truth, appreciating fame yet feeling suffocated by it. These internal battles shaped him more than any award, any show, any headline. Because the real Dave Chappelle, the man who existed beyond the jokes, was someone who had learned to hide his fears behind laughter, his doubts behind wisdom, and his pain behind silence. And that silence would soon grow louder than anything he had ever said. Long before the fame, long before the controversy, long before the name Dave Chappelle echoed through stadiums, there was simply a boy growing up between two very different worlds. His childhood wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy. It was a life shaped by questions, by contradictions, and by the quiet awareness that he never fully belonged in just one place. Dave was born into a family of thinkers, people who valued ideas, truth, and the power of language. His parents weren't celebrities, but they carried an authority and intellect that shaped him more deeply than any spotlight ever could. His father was a professor, a man whose words carried weight, and whose presence filled a room with calm but undeniable strength. His mother was equally powerful in her own way, socially conscious, deeply principled, and committed to fighting for what she believed was right. Growing up, Dave wasn't surrounded by fame. He was surrounded by complexity. Conversations in his home weren't shallow. They were layered with politics, identity, race, history, pain, and hope. While other kids talked about cartoons and games, Dave listened to discussions about the world, about what was broken, and what could be rebuilt. It was the kind of upbringing that forced him to think deeply before he even understood what thinking deeply meant. But his childhood wasn't just intellectual, it was fragmented. He spent parts of his early life in Washington, D.C., a city divided by stark realities. One moment, he could be surrounded by academics and activists. The next, he could be walking streets marked by inequality and struggle. That collision of environments shaped him. It taught him, even as a child, that truth was rarely simple. That the world was not one story, but millions layered on top of each other. And that humor, sharp, honest humor, was often the only way to make sense of the contradictions. Dave wasn't the loud kid. He wasn't the one constantly trying to be funny. He watched more than he spoke. He studied people, their habits, their fears, their weaknesses, their absurdities. He observed how they hid their pain, how they tried to impress each other, how they masked insecurity with bravado. Even as a boy, he had the eye of an artist, someone who could see truth before others recognized it. Comedy found him early, not because he was desperate for attention, but because he was desperate for clarity. Humor became a language he understood instinctively. It wasn't about making people laugh. It was about revealing something real. When he told jokes, adults stopped and listened. They weren't laughing at a child's joke. They were surprised by how accurately he could capture the world around him. But beneath the early brilliance was a quiet loneliness. Being different, being observant, being sensitive, these traits separated him from kids his age. He didn't always fit in. He didn't always feel understood. And he carried that truth with him, silently as he grew older. The most defining part of his childhood, however, was the fracture in his home. His parents separated, and Dave found himself navigating two households, two worlds, two sets of expectations. It wasn't chaos, but it was confusing. He learned early that stability was not guaranteed, that people could love each other deeply and still drift apart, that life wasn't a perfect picture, but a collection of pieces he would spend years trying to assemble. This emotional split shaped him. It created a need inside him, a need to understand why people hurt, why relationships fail, why love doesn't always protect, why truth is sometimes silent, and why pain can live in a home even when intentions are good. When he looked back at his origins, he didn't see a simple childhood. He saw the beginning of everything he would later become: the thinker, the observer, the comedian, the truth-teller, the wanderer searching for identity in a world that rarely made sense. His roots weren't glamorous, but they were profound. His beginnings weren't dramatic, but they were deeply meaningful. They planted the seeds of sensitivity, courage, and introspection that would later define his work, his decisions, and his struggle. Because Dave Chappelle did not become who he is because of fame. He became who he is because of where he started, between two worlds, with a mind that refused to ignore the complexities of life, even when the rest of the world preferred simple stories. And those early complexities would follow him into every chapter that came next. The spark didn't come to Dave Chappelle in a dramatic explosion. It wasn't a sudden revelation or a moment of divine intervention. It arrived slowly, almost quietly, through the rhythm of ordinary days and the subtle pull of something he couldn't yet name. It began with the way he listened. As a teenager, Dave absorbed the world like a sponge. He listened to adults argue about politics, to classmates whisper about insecurities, to neighbors tell stories soaked in humor and pain. Every conversation around him became a kind of lesson, a reminder that people were always revealing more than they intended. And he learned to read between the lines. But the true spark, the one that would change his life, ignited the first time he stepped into a comedy club. He was still young, almost too young to even be allowed in the building, but the moment he crossed the doorway, something in him shifted. The dim lights, the small stage, the smell of anticipation. It felt like a world where truth wasn't just allowed, it was required. People weren't hiding behind politeness or fear. They were raw, real, honest. And he fell in love with that honesty instantly. He watched comedians perform with a mixture of awe and recognition. They were saying the things he had spent his childhood observing. They were exposing the contradictions he had quietly noticed. They were turning pain into perspective, confusion into clarity, injustice into awareness. It was as if the stage was a doorway into a different kind of truth, a truth that could only be spoken through humor. Something inside him whispered, "You belong here." He didn't know how he would get there. He didn't know what it would take. He didn't know if he was ready, but he knew he had found the place where his voice made sense. At home, he began writing jokes in notebooks, scribbling down ideas between classes, between chores, between thoughts that came faster than he could capture them. His mind worked differently now. Everything he saw, every mistake people made, every social contradiction, every hidden fear became material. Not for ridicule, but for understanding. The spark grew stronger the first time he performed. He was nervous, unsure, almost trembling. But when he stepped onto that tiny stage and opened his mouth, the room changed. The audience leaned in. His words landed. They laughed. Not because he was trying to be funny, but because he was telling the truth in a way only he could see it. For the first time, he felt seen. Not as a child, not as a student, not as a kid from two different worlds, but as someone with a gift, a rare gift, a truth-telling gift. The stage didn't just give him confidence, it gave him direction. It gave him purpose. And dangerous as it was, intoxicating as it felt, it gave him something even deeper: escape. A place where he didn't have to explain himself. A place where the contradictions of his life made sense in a way they never had before. But the spark wasn't just about comedy. It was about identity. It was about discovering that he could take the pain of his divided childhood, the confusion of his youth, the complexity of his family, the loneliness he carried, and transform it into connection. He realized his greatest power wasn't in making people laugh. It was in making people see. His early performances didn't make him famous, but they awakened something that had been silent inside him for years. A hunger, a calling, a sense of destiny. People began to recognize that he wasn't like other young comedians. He had depth. He had insight. He had the rare ability to turn tragedy into understanding, to turn social pain into catharsis, to turn personal wounds into universal truths. The spark became a flame the moment he understood he didn't just want to perform, he needed to. The stage wasn't a career, it was a lifeline, a place where he could unburden himself, even as the world placed new expectations on him. This was the beginning of Dave Chappelle's journey toward greatness. But he didn't yet know the cost of that journey. He didn't know how bright the flame would burn, or how much it would consume. Dave Chappelle's breakthrough didn't come from luck. It came from persistence, from long nights in small rooms, from moments where he stood on stage with only a few strangers watching, and somehow still gave everything he had. What looked like an overnight rise from the outside was really a slow, grinding climb built on resilience, discipline, and an almost stubborn belief in his own voice. By the time he entered his late teens, he already had something rare: undeniable presence. He wasn't the loudest or the flashiest comedian, but when he spoke, audiences leaned forward. He didn't tell jokes the way others did. He told truths wrapped in humor, pain hidden inside punchlines, wisdom delivered with an ease that made even the hardest realities feel digestible. It was this gift, this ability to make people confront the world while laughing, that set him apart. Industry insiders began to notice him. Talent scouts, club owners, and TV producers whispered his name in back rooms. Everyone could sense that he was different, an original voice in a field crowded with imitation. When he performed on national television for the first time, he didn't just impress, he stunned. Viewers didn't forget him. They didn't just laugh, they remembered. Opportunities began to open, bigger stages, bigger audiences, bigger expectations. But the true breakthrough came when he embraced the kind of material others were too afraid to touch. Social issues, race, identity, injustice, hypocrisy, human contradiction. He didn't approach these topics with anger or bitterness. He approached them with clarity. He spoke with the insight of someone who had lived between worlds his entire life, and audiences recognized the truth in his words. It was this authenticity that led to the defining moment of his early career, being offered the chance to create his own show. For most comedians, this would have been the ultimate dream, a chance to build a platform based entirely on their ideas. And for Dave, it certainly felt like destiny. But it was also pressure, immense pressure. The kind of pressure that demanded he balance creativity with compromise, honesty with expectations, truth with ratings. When the first episodes aired, the response was seismic. Dave Chappelle wasn't just successful, he was revolutionary. His sketches didn't just entertain, they exposed. They peeled back the layers of society with a level of boldness television hadn't seen in years. People weren't just watching the show, they were analyzing it, arguing about it, quoting it. His work became a cultural mirror, one that reflected uncomfortable truths people couldn't ignore anymore. Almost overnight, Dave went from a rising comedian to a cultural force, a voice, a phenomenon. But with the breakthrough came something he didn't expect: the feeling of losing control. As the show gained momentum, so did the attention. Fans praised him, critics scrutinized him, the network pressured him, executives wanted bigger numbers, bigger risks, bigger impact, without understanding that impact had a cost. And Dave felt that cost deeply. He began to sense that the show, once his creative foundation, was shifting into something else, something that didn't fully belong to him anymore. The pressure to keep pushing boundaries, to keep producing brilliance, to keep carrying the cultural weight on his shoulders, it began to chip away at him. He was no longer just a comedian. He was an expectation, a machine, an idea the world depended on. His breakthrough had transformed his life. It had validated his voice. It had given him power. But it also became the beginning of conflict, a conflict between who he was and what the industry wanted him to be. And beneath the applause, beneath the praise, beneath the rising fame, Dave could feel the first hints of something darker, something heavier, something that whispered a warning he wasn't yet ready to hear. Because behind every breakthrough, there is always a price. At the height of his fame, Dave Chappelle stood on a throne he never asked for. The crown of cultural influence sat heavy on his head, forged not from gold, but from honesty, risk, and a rare kind of brilliance that made people feel seen. He had become the face of a new era in comedy, raw, fearless, unapologetically truthful. His show wasn't just popular, it was historic. People didn't just watch it, they dissected it, debated it, lived by it. Everywhere he went, strangers recognized him. Voices shouted his name. Cameras followed him. Fans quoted lines he had written in small rooms late at night. Even people who had never watched a full episode knew his impact. And yet, behind that public celebration was a private truth few understood. Wearing the crown was exhausting. On paper, he had everything anyone could want: fame, influence, financial success, creative freedom, at least in theory. But the higher he climbed, the more he realized how unstable the ground beneath him had become. With every episode, expectations skyrocketed. With every sketch, the pressure to deliver something even more brilliant intensified. The world began to treat his genius like a factory, something that could produce endlessly without cost. But there was always a cost. Behind closed doors, Dave started to see the cracks. Meetings filled with executives who didn't understand the soul of his work. Demands that pushed his boundaries. Observers who wanted the jokes but not the truth. Fans who celebrated the controversial moments without recognizing the message beneath them. He became the center of conversations he never agreed to have, the subject of debates he didn't start, the symbol of issues he hadn't volunteered to carry alone. With the crown came isolation. People no longer treated him like a person. They treated him like a product. Everyone wanted something. Everyone had opinions. Everyone believed they knew what he should do next. Very few stopped to ask how he felt. He tried to keep up. He pushed himself harder. He wrote obsessively. He performed with intensity. He tried to meet expectations that felt impossible. But the more he gave, the more people wanted from him. It was as if the world decided that because he could hold a mirror up to society, he no longer needed one for himself. The crown also came with misunderstanding. His boldest sketches, the ones he poured the most meaning into, were sometimes consumed for the wrong reasons. Jokes meant to reveal injustice were repeated without context. Messages meant to challenge ignorance were twisted into something else. Instead of provoking thought, some people used his work to fuel the very attitudes he was criticizing. He felt trapped between two worlds, one where people worshipped him and another where people completely misunderstood him. Both felt suffocating. And then came the moment he began to notice something deeper. He was losing himself. The pressure, the noise, the expectations, the constant scrutiny. It all began to erode the quiet person inside him, the introspective thinker, the boy who once found truth in small comedy clubs, the young man who only wanted to speak honestly, not carry the weight of the world. Dave realized that the crown didn't just represent success. It represented responsibility, some of it chosen, but much of it forced upon him. He could feel the world pulling him in different directions. Audiences wanted him to be fearless. Executives wanted him to be profitable. Society wanted him to be political. And somewhere inside all of that, he just wanted to be himself. But that, he soon discovered, was the hardest thing to maintain when everyone else believed they owned a piece of you. The crown grew heavier with each passing day. The applause felt distant. The admiration felt conditional. And the fame that once felt like validation now felt like confinement. Dave Chappelle was at the peak of his career, celebrated, respected, unstoppable in the eyes of the world. But inside, he was standing on a tightrope stretched over a growing emptiness. A quiet voice inside him whispered that something wasn't right, that something was slipping, that something dangerous was coming. A truth was approaching that would change everything. A moment when he would either protect himself or lose himself completely. He sits alone on the back porch of the farm, long after the sun has dropped behind the Ohio hills, letting the cool night wrap around him like something familiar, something forgiving. The air is quiet in a way fame never is. Crickets hum. A single distant dog barks. The stars hang overhead like scattered reminders that some things stay the same no matter how chaotic life becomes. Dave leans back in his old wooden chair, the one that creaks when he moves, the one he never lets anyone replace. He folds his hands and breathes deeply, slow, steady, grounded. For a moment, he isn't the man the world argues about. He isn't the headline, not the punchline, not the controversy, not the legend. He's just a man trying to understand how he got here and how to keep going. He looks at the empty yard in front of him and almost imagines the younger version of himself running through it barefoot, chasing dreams he didn't yet understand. That younger Dave had fire, had fearlessness, had everything to prove, and nothing to lose. But the older Dave knows better. He knows fame has a cost. He knows success doesn't protect you from heartbreak. Sometimes it invites it. He knows that surviving the world is one thing, but surviving your own mind is something else entirely. He exhales, eyes drifting toward the dim light from the kitchen window. Inside, he can hear soft movement, his family settling in for the night. Their presence feels like the last anchor he has. He remembers the years when he almost cut that rope, willingly or not. The years when he disappeared without warning, when people mocked him, doubted him, dismissed him. They didn't know he was drowning. They didn't want to know. Silence doesn't trend. Pain doesn't sell unless someone else is laughing. He closes his eyes, and he lets that truth settle. For years, he thought he needed to be understood. Now he knows better. Understanding is a bonus, not a guarantee. Peace comes from choosing your own truth, not convincing the world to see it. He hears a quiet stepping on the porch behind him. It's one of his children, a hand resting on his shoulder gently, softly, like they're checking if he's really okay. He looks up and gives a faint smile. "You all right, Dad?" they ask. He nods slowly. "Yeah, just thinking." They sit beside him, knees pulled up to their chest, mirroring his posture the way kids often do without realizing it. The stillness between them feels comfortable, like a language both understand. "You don't have to think alone," the child says. Dave laughs under his breath. It's small, but it's real. "I guess I don't," he replies, and the words carry a weight he didn't expect. They stay there for a few minutes, two silhouettes under the night sky, neither rushing the moment. Eventually, his child stands, touches his arm, and whispers, "Good night." "Good night," he echoes. As the door shuts, Dave feels something shift, something quiet but powerful. This right here is what he almost lost. This is what saved him long before the world even knew he needed saving. This is the life behind the stage lights, the life that doesn't need applause. He rises and steps down into the yard, feeling the cool earth beneath his feet. He walks slowly, letting the solitude guide him. He remembers the arenas, the spotlights, the roaring crowds. Those moments feel like separate lifetimes now. Large, loud, overwhelming. He never hated comedy. He hated what it demanded of him, pieces of himself he never got back, parts he never realized he was giving away. He finds the old maple tree at the edge of the property, its branches stretching outward like an old friend. He touches the rough bark, grounding himself. For the first time in a long while, he whispers a truth he once feared saying out loud. "I miss who I used to be." But then another thought follows, slow and gentle like a string pulling him forward. "I'm learning who I'm meant to be now." The wind passes through the leaves, almost like an answer. He sits beneath the tree, staring out at the empty field. He thinks about every moment that broke him, every moment that rebuilt him, and every moment that forced him to choose between the world's expectations and his own sanity. He realizes he doesn't owe the spotlight his soul. He doesn't owe his trauma an audience. He doesn't owe anyone an explanation for choosing peace over applause. He leans his head back against the tree trunk and breathes. The night feels kinder than the world ever has. This is the resolution he never said out loud. This is the truth the documentaries never capture. This is the part of the story nobody asks about because the world forgets that legends are still human. For a long time, he sits there without moving, letting the weight he's carried for years finally settle, finally soften. He feels a strange sensation, something he hasn't felt in a while. Not triumph, not glory, not victory. Acceptance. He's still healing. He's still learning. He's still trying. And that's enough. He stands, brushing dirt from his hands, and walks back toward the house. The porch light glows softly, like a reminder that some places are always waiting for you to come home. He steps inside quietly, closing the door behind him. Before turning away, he glances back through the glass at the darkness outside. For the first time, it doesn't scare him. It doesn't chase him. It doesn't swallow him. It just exists, like he does, without needing to be anything more. And he finally whispers almost to himself, "I'm okay. Not healed. Not perfect, but okay." And for a man who spent years lost in the noise of the world, that single truth is a resolution in itself. The sun rises slowly over the rolling Ohio fields, spilling soft gold across the grass. It's the kind of morning that feels like a clean slate, quiet, unhurried, untouched by the noise of the outside world. Dave is already awake. He stands by the kitchen counter, both hands wrapped around a warm mug, watching steam drift upward like a gentle reminder that life doesn't need to be explosive to be meaningful. His eyes look tired, but not from pain, more from reflection. The kind that happens when someone has lived many lives inside one lifetime. The house is still. The kind of stillness that only comes before everyone else wakes, before the day fills with movement and conversation. For this small window of time, he is simply a man breathing in the calm. He takes a sip, lets it settle, then sets the mug down gently. His gaze drifts toward the back door that leads to the wide-open yard, a place that once felt like an escape, then a refuge, then a reminder. Now it's something else entirely, a bridge between the life he lived and the life he's still learning to accept. He steps outside, barefoot again, feeling the dew-covered grass cold against his skin. The morning air presses softly against him, cool, crisp, honest. He walks slowly toward the same maple tree where he sat last night. Its branches spread wide overhead, catching the morning light like a canopy of hope. He touches the trunk again, this time with a gentler hand. Everything feels quieter now, inside him, around him, through him. For the first time in years, he doesn't feel the old weight tugging at him. The weight of expectations, the weight of fame, the weight of being turned into an idea instead of being allowed to be a person. He remembers the nights on stage, the roar of laughter shaking through his bones, the blinding lights, the feeling of being untouchable. He remembers how intoxicating it was, how easy it became to rely on the noise instead of the silence. How he built entire worlds with his words, worlds where people could laugh at the truth without carrying it home. But he also remembers the nights off stage, the quiet rooms, the long drives back to hotels where no one spoke his name, the way the applause died the moment he stepped behind the curtain. That contrast carved into him deeply, carving windows where walls used to be. He understands now, the applause was never meant to fill the places inside him that needed healing. He breathes in deeply, letting the morning fill him. He thinks of his younger self again, the one who believed the world needed to understand him to validate him, the one who pushed himself harder than anyone asked him to, the one who tried to outrun his own fears by making other people laugh. And then he thinks of the man he is today, quieter, stronger in ways no camera could capture, more aware of the cost of survival. He isn't running anymore. He isn't hiding. He isn't performing for acceptance. He's simply living in a way that feels real. He turns and heads back to the house, walking slowly, letting the sunlight warm his face. As he approaches the door, he sees shadows moving inside, his family beginning their morning routines. The sound of faint laughter echoes through the hallway, and something inside him softens. He steps in and is greeted by a simple sight. One of his children sitting at the table, stuffing toast into their mouth too fast. Another searching for their missing shoe. Someone asking where the keys are. Someone else complaining about who finished the orange juice. Ordinary chaos. A small, imperfect world. A world where he isn't a headline. He's just dad. One of his kids looks at him and smiles. "Morning," he smiles back. a real one that lifts the corners of his eyes. Morning! He moves to the counter, picks up his mug, and watches them with a kind of tenderness he rarely shows publicly. This is not the loud, dramatic ending people expect from someone with a life as big as his. It's not a comeback moment. It's not a triumphant speech. It's something quieter, something truer, a man-learning piece. Later, as the morning settles into its rhythm, he steps outside again, this time standing near the wooden fence at the edge of the property. He looks out at the fields stretching endlessly in front of him, and he realizes something he never allowed himself to admit. He doesn't need the world to know the full story of what he survived. He doesn't need applause to validate his journey. He doesn't need to explain the heartbreak behind the spotlight. He just needs to live, to breathe, to stay present in the life he built, one he almost walked away from without understanding its worth. He sighs, but it's not a heavy sigh. It's a release of years of noise, years of pressure, years of misunderstanding, years of holding himself together for the world while falling apart in private. He places both hands on the fence and leans forward slightly, grounding himself. The older he gets, the more he realizes that healing isn't a moment, it's a rhythm. Some days he moves forward, some days he stands still, some days he slips backward, and that's okay. Because he's still here, still fighting, still choosing life when it would have been easier to disappear again. He thinks back to the decision he made years ago to walk away from everything. At the time, it felt like failure. The world mocked him. But now, with the benefit of hindsight, he realizes something powerful. It wasn't running. It was survival. It was the bravest thing he ever did. He didn't lose himself back then. He saved himself. And today, standing in the quiet morning with the sun rising behind him, he finally feels the truth of that settle into his bones. His story isn't tragic. His story isn't broken. His story isn't over. It's human. Painful in places, beautiful in others, unfinished in all the ways that matter. And maybe that's the point. He turns back toward the house once more, hearing the muffled noise of his family laughing inside. The corner of his mouth lifts, soft and peaceful. This life right here, is the ending no one ever sees. Not on stage, not in interviews, not in headlines, not in specials. A man choosing peace over noise, presence over pressure, stillness over spectacle. And as he steps back into his home, closing the door behind him, one quiet truth settles completely into his heart. The life beyond the spotlight is not the end of his story. It's the beginning of the one that finally makes sense. Silence was never something Dave Chappelle welcomed easily. Not at first. Not during the years when laughter roared and spotlights burned bright. In those early decades of his career, silence was frightening, a reminder of absence, of uncertainty, of emptiness. But as he grew older, as he stepped back from the stage, as the weight of the crown pressed against him, he began to understand something most people never grasp. Silence is not absence. Silence is clarity. Silence is survival. Silence is the sound of your own mind. Speaking truths no audience can interpret for you. When he first walked away from the limelight, whispers of his disappearance spread like wildfire. Fans, critics, and media outlets speculated endlessly. Where had he gone? Why had he left at the height of success? Some said he had lost his courage. Others said he had lost his mind. Many believed he had failed. Few wondered what he had gained. The silence that followed wasn't quiet in the world. It was quiet in him. The world kept talking, kept judging, kept speculating. But inside, he was learning to listen to himself. He was learning to navigate the internal landscape he had ignored for decades. The terrain of fear, reflection, and memory. Every day in that silence was a lesson in patience, a lesson in self-respect, a lesson in humility. In those years away, he found himself thinking about the beginnings, the sparks, the breakthroughs, and the crown that had once felt so heavy. He remembered the tiny stages, the small rooms, the early nights when no one was watching, and he realized that the pressure he had felt at the peak was nothing compared to the pressure he had put on himself all along. The expectation to be perfect, to be clever, to be brave. to be fearless, to carry the weight of the world with a smile. Now, in the silence, he was freed from all of that, freed to examine the pieces of his own life, to question his choices without the world judging them, to understand the cost of genius and the cost of courage. He began to see patterns he had never noticed before, truths that had been buried under the noise of applause, contracts, interviews, and deadlines. The first revelation was simple yet profound. He was human, not a machine of wit, not a philosopher disguised as a comedian, not a voice for everyone else. Simply human, fragile in some ways, stubborn in others, full of contradictions, full of mistakes, full of love, full of fear. And in recognizing this, he finally allowed himself to stop performing, not just on stage, but in life. The second revelation was terrifying. Freedom is lonely. The more he let the world fade, the more he confronted himself, and the more he realized how much he had been avoiding the unresolved griefs, avoiding the deep-seated fears, avoiding the parts of him that had been silenced by the demands of others. Silence forced him to meet himself, and he wasn't always pleased with what he saw, but slowly, with patience, he began to understand that acceptance didn't require perfection. It required honesty. He started to write, not for anyone else, not for an audience, not for fame, not even for legacy, but for clarity. Not jokes at first, not sketches, not commentary, just words spilling onto paper like lifelines thrown into turbulent water, memories of childhood, fragments of family, fears, hopes, regrets, everything he had locked away, everything he had used comedy to disguise. And in writing, he began to hear the echoes of the boy who had once listened so carefully to the world, the boy who had been sensitive, observant, and searching for meaning in every conversation around him. He wrote of the small humiliations no one noticed, the heartbreaks that were never documented, the betrayals he didn't speak of publicly, the moments of fear that had almost consumed him. And with each word, he reclaimed a part of himself he had given away often, unknowingly, to the industry, to the public, and to the person he thought he had to be. The silence also brought reflection on his successes. And here, he faced another truth. Even brilliance comes with scars. Even genius is not immunity. Even influence does not protect you from loneliness, anxiety, or doubt. He remembered the thrill of performing before packed audiences, the electricity of laughter ringing through his ears, the recognition and respect from peers. He remembered it all with gratitude, but he also remembered the exhaustion, the pressure, the invisible weight that only grew heavier with each applause. He realized that he had loved his art without fully loving himself. And that imbalance, he understood, could have broken him if he had stayed too long in the glare. Silence became a teacher. It taught him boundaries, the necessity of saying no, the importance of choosing carefully what battles to fight, the value of protecting mental and emotional space. In the quiet, he confronted fear, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of irrelevance, and he discovered something unexpected. Fear can become strength when it's acknowledged and named. When fear is faced in silence, it transforms from a chain into a compass, guiding choices that honor the self rather than the world's expectations. And yet, silence was not merely personal, it was social. He had once believed that he had to be everywhere, that he had to be the voice of a generation, that he had to speak for those who were underrepresented. But in stepping back, he learned that the world could survive without him performing constant commentary. That influence wasn't always measured by visibility. That presence wasn't always measured by applause. That impact could exist quietly, in small gestures, in honest work, in the lives he touched indirectly. He discovered the subtle power of watching rather than performing, listening rather than speaking, healing rather than proving. And he realized that these moments, though invisible to the public eye, were not wasted. They were the foundation of a new self, a self untethered from the demands of fame, liberated by the quiet. In this space, Dave also began to consider the people he loved, the family he sometimes neglected in pursuit of work, the friends he lost along the way, the colleagues who misunderstood him. He started to repair, in ways small but sincere, relationships that had been strained. He learned that intimacy requires presence, and presence requires silence. And in giving himself that time and space, he was finally able to be a more authentic friend, partner, and father. The silence stretched for months, sometimes years. Some days it was lonely. Some days it was terrifying. Some days it reminded him of everything he had sacrificed. But gradually, it became a rhythm that allowed him to breathe, to think, to plan, to prepare, to become a man who could return to the world not out of obligation or expectation, but on his own terms. And in that silence, he finally confronted the biggest truth of all. He was ready, not for fame, not for applause, not for controversy, but to live honestly, to speak honestly, to create honestly, to engage with the world honestly, and to know for the first time in decades that even if no one understood, even if no one celebrated, even if no one noticed, he was still enough. This is what the silence gave him: clarity, healing, self-respect, perspective. It taught him to distinguish between the noise of others and the voice of his own conscience. It revealed that peace isn't found in the roar of an audience. It's found in the quiet acceptance of one's own journey. For Dave Chappelle, silence became both a sanctuary and a teacher. It became a reminder that stepping away doesn't mean giving up, that absence doesn't mean irrelevance, and that the most profound victories are often invisible. And when he finally chose to speak again, to return, to perform, to engage with the world on his own terms, he carried something the audience could never see: a man tempered by solitude, healed by reflection, and strengthened by the lessons only silence could teach. Because the world may remember the punchlines, the specials, the controversies, but Dave remembers the quiet nights, the empty rooms, the calm before the sunrise, and the slow, steady reclaiming of himself. The silence was not empty, it was everything. Returning to the world after years of silence is never simple. For Dave Chappelle, it wasn't about making a grand entrance or reclaiming the spotlight he had left behind. It was about stepping forward on his own terms, carrying the lessons of solitude and survival like armor, yet also letting vulnerability peek through in ways he had once refused to allow. When he first considered coming back, the idea was almost frightening. The world hadn't stopped. Fame hadn't paused. Expectations hadn't faded. If anything, they had grown louder, sharper, more insistent. The headlines, the speculation, the pressure, they were all waiting, like a tide that never rests. And yet, inside him, a quiet certainty had begun to bloom. A certainty that if he returned, it would not be because the world demanded it, but because he had finally found a reason for himself. The first shows were small, intentionally so. No massive arenas, no screaming crowds, no high-profile networks. Just him, a microphone, and the truth he had spent years refining in silence. He didn't rush the jokes. He didn't chase the laughter. He let the material breathe, letting the story unfold naturally, like a conversation he was having with someone he trusted deeply. The audience becoming confidants rather than judges. Every word he delivered carried the weight of experience. Every pause, every inflection, every observation was a bridge between the person he had been and the man he had become. The audience could feel it, even if they didn't fully understand it. They weren't just laughing. They were witnessing honesty that had been tempered by time, struggle, and reflection. He found freedom in the return, but freedom wasn't simple joy. It was discipline. It was choosing which truths to reveal and which to keep private. It was navigating the delicate balance between being fearless and being careful. It was realizing that some battles weren't worth fighting publicly, that some jokes carried too much baggage, and that the responsibility of his voice didn't require constant display. For Dave, the return wasn't a single event. It was a series of small, deliberate steps. Interviews done on his terms, specials produced under his guidance, tours designed to respect his own boundaries. He was no longer the young comedian desperate for approval or recognition. He was a man who had walked away from everything and returned not as a performer for others, but as an artist for himself. And yet, even in this measured return, the echoes of the past were never far. Memories of the pressure, the mistakes, the near burnout haunted him, whispering reminders that brilliance had its price. The world, eager to see him as the fearless icon he once was, sometimes failed to see the human beneath, but he learned to accept it. He learned that not everyone would understand, and that was okay. His validation no longer depended on the outside, it depended on the quiet knowledge that he had survived, that he had reflected, that he had reclaimed his voice. The return also brought reflection on his influence. People still analyzed every joke, every decision, every word, but this time he observed it with detachment. He no longer needed to perform for approval or validation. He no longer needed to be a symbol for anyone but himself. And in that detachment, he found clarity. He could engage, entertain, and challenge, all without losing himself. In interviews and specials, he spoke differently. Not louder, not more dramatically, but with a precision honed by experience. He didn't just want to make people laugh, he wanted to make them think. He wanted to hold a mirror up to society, but with a gentleness that acknowledged the human complexity behind every reflection. The biting edge of satire remained, but it was tempered with empathy, understanding, and sometimes quiet sorrow. Fans noticed, critics noticed, colleagues noticed, but most importantly, he noticed. He noticed the difference in himself, the absence of fear that had once driven him, the presence of self-respect that had been missing, the ability to laugh at the absurdities of life without being consumed by them, the freedom to engage with his craft without being consumed by it. The return was also personal. Away from the stage lights, he reconnected with family and friends in ways he had avoided during the peak of fame. He was present fully and intentionally. Conversations that had once been rushed or distracted became meaningful. He laughed in ways that were unguarded, without performance. He cried in ways that were unashamed, without expectation. He lived moments that weren't recorded, that weren't publicized, that didn't carry a headline. And in those moments, he found the deepest reward of all, himself. Yet, even in this reclaimed space, the challenges remained. Returning to the public eye meant navigating controversy, criticism, and expectation. His words were still dissected, his choices still analyzed. But now he approached it differently. He understood that the world would never fully see him, and he no longer demanded that it should. Instead, he focused on being truthful, authentic, and present in ways that mattered most to him, to his art, and to those he loved. As he stepped back onto larger stages, he did so with a measured confidence. Not arrogance, not desperation, not performative bravado, just a man standing in his truth, delivering words he believed in, embracing the power of silence, reflection, and lived experience. The laughter returned, yes, but it was richer, deeper, tempered by the recognition that humor could heal, provoke, and reveal. It wasn't just entertainment, it was a conversation, a reflection of life itself. And in this return, Dave Chappelle discovered something profound: that absence can strengthen presence, that stepping away can sharpen perspective, and that surviving the storm of one's own life is often the greatest performance of all. The world welcomed him back, but this time he returned not as a symbol, not as a product, not as a legend, but as a man who had finally learned the value of his own voice, and the peace that comes from speaking it on your own terms. He returned to laughter, but more importantly, he returned to himself. Legacy is a strange word. It carries the weight of permanence, of remembrance, of impact. Yet it is also slippery, ephemeral, impossible to fully control. For Dave Chappelle, legacy was never something he sought. It was never the reason he performed, wrote, or risked himself on stage. Yet, through his life, through the choices he made, through the silence he endured and the return he orchestrated, a legacy quietly began to take shape. One far more profound than applause, ratings, or headlines could ever measure. When people speak of Dave Chappelle today, they often focus on the laughter. The specials, the jokes that cut through absurdity and pointed directly at the heart of society, the razor-sharp satire, the fearlessness. But those are only fragments of a larger truth. His legacy is as much about what he survived as what he created. It is as much about the courage to walk away as it is about the bravery to return. It is about navigating the complexities of fame, expectation, and personal morality while refusing to lose oneself in the process. He once said that stepping away was necessary, that he could not live entirely for the world's approval. That decision, controversial at the time, has become a defining moment in his story. Not because it was dramatic or defiant, but because it demonstrated an often overlooked strength, the strength to protect one's own humanity, the courage to prioritize authenticity over performance, the wisdom to understand that influence is not synonymous with existence, and that one's value does not depend on constant visibility. His legacy is found in those rare moments where art meets life and leaves an imprint on the world that goes beyond entertainment. In comedy clubs, people still tell stories of nights when his words pierced through pretense, when his timing, insight, and vulnerability made them confront truths they had ignored. In universities, social commentators cite his sketches as examples of cultural critique that transcends humor. In homes, parents play his specials for children, not merely for laughter, but for lessons about observation, empathy, and courage. But perhaps the most enduring part of Dave Chappelle's legacy is the silent one. The invisible thread woven through his years of absence. The period when he disappeared from the spotlight is now recognized not as retreat, but as profound self-preservation. It is studied as an act of integrity, a demonstration that mental health, personal boundaries, and self-respect matter as much as public acclaim. It is the story that proves greatness is not always measured by constant output or visibility, but by the careful stewardship of one's own soul. Those who knew him personally, friends, family, collaborators, speak of a man transformed by silence, a man who emerged from the pressures of fame, tempered, reflective, and deliberate. They speak of a gentleness that contrasts with the biting intensity of his public persona. They speak of laughter shared quietly, of listening before speaking, of a depth of empathy rarely visible to the public. This quiet influence is as much a part of his legacy as the millions who laughed at his specials or debated his social commentary. His legacy also lies in the bravery of vulnerability. Dave's willingness to reveal his struggles without fully explaining, without seeking pity, has inspired countless others to acknowledge their own pain, to step back when necessary, and to value their personal truth above societal expectation. He has become a model for the nuanced understanding that one can be brilliant, influential, and still human. That one can be public and private simultaneously, balancing visibility with introspection. That walking away can be just as heroic as standing in the spotlight. Comedy itself bears the mark of his influence. A new generation of performers cites him as a mentor, not in the traditional sense of advice giving, but in the sense of showing by example. He demonstrated that the best comedy does not simply entertain, it reflects, challenges, illuminates. He showed that humor can be a lens through which society examines itself, a language through which marginalized voices find expression, and a tool that can heal as much as it critiques. Even the controversies surrounding him have become part of his legacy. In navigating criticism, misunderstanding, and the often unforgiving court of public opinion, Dave has illustrated the importance of self-possession. He has shown that one can engage thoughtfully, respond selectively, and still maintain integrity, that the world will always misinterpret, misjudge, or sensationalize, but that does not diminish the truth you carry within yourself. And yet, legacy is not only about others' perceptions. For Dave Chappelle, his legacy is ultimately about the life he has built, the family he cherishes, and the man he has become. It is about the ability to return to the things that matter most, to be present in moments that are unseen, unremarkable, yet infinitely significant. It is about laughter shared at a kitchen table, quiet walks under the Ohio sky, the small, ordinary acts that form the bedrock of a meaningful life. That, perhaps more than any stage or spotlight, is the most enduring testament to his existence. His influence continues to ripple outward. Comedians, writers, cultural critics, and ordinary audiences alike feel its subtle power, not through coercion or spectacle, but through the integrity of a life lived according to one's own principles. A life that proves resilience, courage, and reflection are forms of artistry in themselves. Dave Chappelle's story reminds the world that true impact is measured not only in applause or recognition, but in the capacity to survive, to grow, and to reclaim one's own narrative despite immense external pressure. Legacy is also generational. Dave has left behind a blueprint for navigating the intersection of talent, ethics, and mental health. The artists who follow him will inherit lessons about courage, boundaries, and authenticity. They will witness the power of stepping away when necessary, of returning on one's own terms, of creating work that reflects the complexity of human experience rather than pandering to trends or expectation. They will inherit the reminder that brilliance can be sustained without self-destruction, that humor can be fearless yet compassionate, and that the life behind the curtain often contains the truest victories. In the final analysis, Dave Chappelle's legacy is not confined to what he said on stage or the laughter he provoked. It resides in the silences he embraced, the boundaries he set, the courage to walk away, and the bravery to return. It lives in the people he has influenced quietly, the relationships he has nurtured thoughtfully, and the personal truths he has honored fiercely. His story is a testament to the human condition, brilliant, messy, painful, and ultimately redemptive. It is a reminder that survival is itself an achievement, that integrity is its own reward, and that the choices we make for ourselves often have the most profound and lasting impact on the world around us. And perhaps most importantly, his legacy proves this, that a life lived authentically, even in the shadows of fame and expectation, can be richer, more meaningful, and more enduring than any applause ever given. Dave Chappelle's influence will be measured not merely in the headlines or the awards, but in the countless lives touched by his courage, honesty, and insight. It will be felt in the silence before laughter, in the spaces between expectation and reality, in the quiet strength of those who realize that survival, integrity, and self-respect are among the greatest achievements any human being can attain. His story, the journey from the spark to the crown, the silence, the return, and now the legacy, stands as a testament to the complexity and beauty of the human experience. It reminds the world that behind the spotlight, behind the fame, behind the jokes, lies a person striving to live fully, wisely, and with purpose. That struggle, that triumph, that humanity. This is the real legacy, and it is one that will endure. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to Talksberry and comment. Remember, greatness isn't in the spotlight, but in the struggle behind it.